What would you do if your boss framed you for his own theft and got you fired, leaving you jobless with a baby on the way? In today's story, the protagonist's choice is a masterclass in how to handle it. This all took place back in the mid-90s, during the last throes of the analog era. Our most common business tools were fax machines, FedEx, dial-up computers, and voicemail. I was a young regional sales manager for a major consumer brand, responsible for the grocery class of trade across 11 western states. My division was based in Chicago, but I worked out of a home office on the West Coast. I'd built a solid reputation for myself by consistently making my sales quota and keeping my costs well within budget. The company would often reassign me to struggling markets, and more often than not, I'd manage to turn them around and hit the sales numbers. My method was nothing too fancy. I just figured out where the best opportunities were and focused all my energy on them. Back then, we had a tool called Market Development Funds, or MDF. We jokingly called it making days fun, because before such things were deemed illegal, it was money we could use for almost anything imaginable. We're talking about wining and dining clients, sending buyers to the Super Bowl, or taking them on so-called market research trips. I once took 6 executives for a weekend of fishing in Mexico. As long as you had receipts and your boss gave you the nod, or in some cases, specifically asked not to know, you could spend it as you saw fit. It was an old school Mad Men style slush fund, and it was all tax deductible. This MDF budget was typically 2% of your total annual gross sales. And it was a use it or lose it deal, meaning it had to be spent by the end of the year because it wouldn't roll over. I was pretty frugal, so I always had some left over. Being a team player, I'd let my boss, a guy we'll call Donovan, know he could use my surplus. I never thought it was a big deal. Towards the end of one year, my weekly FedEx package from headquarters started including sign-offs for payments to a supplier I had never heard of. What was strange was that they were for a demo company, the people who offer you samples or coupons in a grocery store, that wasn't one of my approved regional suppliers. I called the broker in that specific market, and they confirmed they had never used or even heard of this company. It finally dawned on me that these sign-offs must have come from Donovan himself, who had just slipped them into my stack of paperwork. I called him to ask what was going on. He told me they should be charged to my MDF and that I shouldn't worry about it. Donovan made a critical error at that moment, assuming my compliance was a sign of ignorance. He was completely unaware that this single, careless act of tossing a few bogus invoices my way would be the thread I'd later pull to unravel his entire career. His explanation was a bit unusual, since demos were normally funded from other budgets or came down from the marketing department. But he was the boss, so I did as he asked. Whatever. I signed off on them. About 3 months later, I was summoned to headquarters for a meeting. They told me I was being transferred to a market I'd never worked in before and that I would be required to relocate to the southeast. The timing couldn't have been worse. My wife was pregnant, and we had just started a massive remodel on our new house. The company offered some relocation benefits, but it was simply too chaotic for us to pull up our roots and move across the country. I had to decline the offer. They told me my options were to either find another job within the company or take a severance package. I ended up taking the severance. Several months went by. Then, an ex-coworker called me with some news. He told me that my old region had been taken over by one of Donovan's past work associates, whom he had managed to get hired to fill my spot. And the region was tanking badly. None of it made sense. Why was I, a successful manager, terminated and replaced by some crony who lived in another city and couldn't even do the job? In my naivety, I started to think I might have put a target on my back. I started digging, which was much harder back then before the internet. After some research, I discovered that the demo company that had been billing my MDF was based in Donovan's previous city. It was nothing more than a P.O. box, a telephone number, and a DBA, a business name, registered by the new person in my old job. And I later found out this person was his girlfriend. His mistress. I was livid. This revealed Donovan's greatest flaw, his arrogance. He believed he was untouchable. That a fired subordinate was no threat. That short-sightedness would ultimately seal his fate. Like most people, I tend to fantasize about revenge but never act on it. It's usually just a coping mechanism. But this was so egregious, so uncalled for, and so disruptive to my life that I felt I had to get even. A plan began to evolve. I was going to take this guy down. Whatever the time or cost. I was going to get this mofo. I suppose I could have ratted him out to the company, but I figured they might just dismiss my complaint as the ramblings of a disgruntled ex-employee with an axe to grind. I needed a better hook. I decided I would approach Donovan as a phony recruiter. Not just any resume collector, but a retained corporate headhunter, the kind of exclusive professional paid big money to fill major executive roles. Early in my career, I had spent a year working for a super exclusive headhunting firm, so I knew exactly how the process worked. To pull it off, my subterfuge involved international telexes, professionally forged letterhead, friends with fake English accents, and even pals overseas to do my bidding. The key to the whole con was Donovan's own obsessions, expensive watches and golf. He was a fanboy of Swiss watches, wore pricey models, and knew everything about their rare complications. He also lived and breathed golf, playing it, watching it, talking about it incessantly. This was my bait. I arranged for him to be approached about a dream executive position with a major Swiss watch company. The job was tied to managing sponsorships for pro golf and other swanky sports. The offer included a staggering list of benefits and perks, a six-figure salary, a huge travel budget, car and entertainment allowances, and access to the best watches in the world. The job would require him to hobnob with major sports organizers and fly first class around the world, essentially spending a fortune. It was a job he could only dream of. I played him slowly and methodically. A long con. Stringing him along for months until the time was right to close with the final offer. There was just one catch: he had to report to Switzerland for the final onboarding. I deliberately scheduled his appointment for the same week as his current company's mandatory division meetings. These meetings were impossible to miss without raising serious red flags. Donovan, as expected, grew worried, telling the recruiter that his absence would be impossible to cover, especially since he'd be out of the country. Our fake headhunting firm graciously offered to move the appointment up by a few days so he could make it back for his meetings. However, he was told he'd need to purchase his own unrestricted business class airline ticket and make his own hotel reservations. Save your receipts, we told him. The watch company will reimburse you. It's a testament to the power of a con that the mark's own greed blinds them to all red flags. Donovan was so mesmerized by the prize that he failed to question why a prestigious company would ask a top candidate to front their own international travel expenses. His desperation to land the dream job made him the easiest target in the world. Donovan arrived in Switzerland and checked into a swanky expensive hotel suite, putting the massive charge on his personal credit card. Waiting for him was a note from the watch company, informing him that due to a major corporate crisis, his appointment had to be rescheduled for the following Monday. He called the phony recruiter in a full-blown panic about missing his mandatory meetings back in the States. It was agreed that he would just have to call in sick. After all, he was on the verge of landing a much better job on greener fairways. We told him to enjoy his weekend in Europe. By Monday, he'd be in his dream job, while Donovan was anxiously cooling his jets in Europe. I made my move. I nonchalantly called his boss, the president of the division, and casually asked for a reference on Donovan, confirming his dates of employment and work ethic. You'd be surprised how often this mistake happens in the corporate world. The president, to his credit, didn't act surprised or tip his hand. But like a good corporate suit, he simply referred me to human resources. Before he could transfer the call, I let it slip that Donovan was currently in Europe finalizing his new job and had already given notice. My bad. I eventually pieced together the bloody aftermath from my old coworkers. When Monday came and went with no contact, Donovan must have been absolutely apoplectic. As one person later commented, he must have gone crazy in that hotel room. We had cut all communications to let him twist in the wind. But our exchange received at least 20 frantic calls and multiple faxes from him. He apparently hung around the hotel for another day or two before finally deciding to fly home. I assume at some point he must have tried to contact the real watch company, but I never confirmed it. When he finally got home, he found that his office had been completely packed up and the contents left with his wife. An HR person met him at an off-site location to give him his severance check and collect the company car and other property. I heard his wife left him sometime after that, and his mistress was fired for theft. In the end, I figure he spent at least $10,000 of his own money on that pointless trip to Europe. I wish I could say that I tipped my hand and let Donovan know that I was the author of his demise. But it served no purpose and could have exposed me to retribution by my own moral lodestar. I got even with a thief who was perfectly content to steal from the company and destroy my livelihood to cover his tracks. That was plenty. This story is true, and it shows that revenge isn't always pleasant or easy. But sometimes it's the only path to justice. As I've gotten older, I do agree to an extent that living well is the best revenge. But I believe that's only true after the person who wronged you pays for what they did. This elaborate plan was a testament to the core of any confidence scam. The con relies on the confidence the mark has in the story. Donovan was so deeply invested in his obsessions that when a recruiter called and dangled a perfect job tailored to his vanities, he never stood a chance. A few faxes and phone calls later, the guy was hooked. Ultimately, this wasn't some petty prank. This was a calculated strike against a man who used his power to harm others for personal gain. My actions had consequences, but they were the direct result of his. So, what do you think? Was this intricate, life-altering revenge justified? Or did it go too far? Let me know your thoughts in the comments.